What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. What's up, guys? This is Ed from TechSource, and today we are covering Green Lantern versus Aliens. It's actually our Indie Comics Day, but I kind of feel like this would be fun because I wanted to cover Aliens, but it's been so long since we covered Aliens, I didn't know if anybody would watch it, so I figured let's bridge the gap and let's do Green Lanterns versus Aliens. That way we get like comic book superheroes and aliens, because I love Xenomorphs. The Xenomorph comics are really, really cool. Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind is that because this is Green Lanterns versus Aliens, you're going to see some weird things that are going to sort of throw you off kilter in terms of the fact that you're going to be like, that's ridiculous. No way a Green Lantern would or would not be able to do that. But it does make for kind of an interesting little bit of a story. So initially this opens up with just some unlucky Green Lantern that's apparently implanted with an embryo, and of course an alien breaks out of his chest. And that's par for the course. Whenever it comes to stories like this, it always opens up with somebody's chest being busted open. But at that point, it just kind of switches over to your traditional fare of superhero escapades on Earth. You've got Green Arrow, you got Black Canary. They're facing off against some, criminals that are there. Green Lantern Hal Jordan shows up, he saves the day, and everything's done. Now, in terms of the whole superhero aspect and the Green Lanterns really getting into the mix, this comes in with the Guardians of the Universe. Now, something I want you guys to also recognize here is that the first part of this story, that is to say, this bit with Hal Jordan, of course, takes place before the events of Emerald Twilight, when Hal Jordan went crazy and declared himself Parallax and, laid waste to the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps. We don't know exactly when, we just kind of know that it does, but him showing up on this far-off planet on the edge of space or whatever it is, really comes alongside a handful of other Guardians. Now, of course, one of the things that DC really always did with these, when they crossed over with, I don't remember if it was Dark Horse or IDW. I want to say it was Dark Horse. But one of the things that always happened, regardless of what it is there's always some measure of familiarity. And that makes sense, because if you have Hal Jordan here alongside Green Lanterns that you'd never seen or heard of, then it'd be kind of weird. It seemed a little strange. But at this point in time, when they arrive on this planet, they basically end up finding out that they're here because of the fact that the Green Lantern of this sector had basically just gone missing. And so, of course, this leads to the arrival of all these different Xenomorphs pouring out. Now, this is what makes this story kind of cool, is because on the surface, we're like, okay, so when you watch Aliens, it's the Colonial Marines who are really, really cool. They're the toughest folks in the world until they meet the Xenomorphs, and then they just get wrecked left and right. You know that at the end of the day, the only thing that stands between these Marines and death is whatever awesome guns they happen to have and their wits. With the Green Lanterns, they've got rings that allow them to do virtually anything they want to. They can make any kind of construct that they can think of, and then that's it. I mean, they basically have the upper hand on these mindless beasts and so on and so forth. But the funny thing about this is that the Xenomorphs are really, really fast, and they're very hard to track. And so, where we would normally think this would be a super easy conflict, no muss, no fuss, and things would wrap up very, very fast, ultimately, these Green Lanterns are almost easily taken by surprise. Now, the other half of this is that where the response is, let's destroy them, Hal Jordan's answer is, no, we can't. And that's where things get a little hairy. That's one of those instances I talked about where it's just kind of like, that wouldn't really happen. Under normal circumstances, virtually anybody would have just been like, yeah, I agree, let's just wipe them all out. But Hal Jordan, back in the days of him when he was a Green Lantern before the events of Emerald Twilight, while he wasn't necessarily like this, philanthropist, humanitarian, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, what he did believe in is the sanctity of life. As Green Lanterns, they can't just go in and obliterate every single threat they come across, because if they did, there would be no races left in existence. And so because of that, the goal is to basically mediate the threat, remove it from being a danger to the rest of the universe, and then call it a day. And so the response of Hal Jordan is to basically round up all these Xenomorphs and drop them off on the only place where they can't harm anybody else, the planet Mogo. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to it. No, I'm just messing around. They meet the Xenomorphs and they just put them on another planet, and that's the end of the story. Peace. That'd be so disappointing. I'd be so angry. No, what it does is it basically shifts its focus to after the events of Emerald Twilight, with Kyle Rayner becoming the new Green Lantern. Now, for those of you guys who are new, and we've talked about this a million times before, when I say Emerald Twilight, the long and short of that story is Hal Jordan wasn't selling as the Green Lantern. DC wanted to get rid of him, replace him with somebody new. Hal Jordan wiped out all the Green Lanterns, and Kyle Rayner was the only one to receive a ring, the only one left. Now, the reason why that's important is because this is when we start to run into weird continuity errors here. One of the things you guys notice is that Kyle Rayner is basically grabbed by a handful of just weird looking aliens. One of these aliens is a guy by the name of Tomar Dar. Now, this guy, as far as I'm aware, doesn't exist. I mean, he's never been seen in any other comics. If he has, then I'm not familiar with him. But there's also characters here like Salak. As far as I'm aware, all these guys are supposed to be dead. The only Green Lantern that should be alive is Kyle Rayner. Really, it's just one of these things where you just kind of have to take it for what it's worth. A lot of these stories, the way they're done, they're not really in continuity. They kind of are, but they kind of of aren't. It's just a story that's out there somewhere. So you just gotta kind of take it for what it's worth and just sort of roll with it. But the whole basis behind the arrival of Salak and these guys is Salak basically says, hey, look, there was a freighter that crashed on Mogo. We dropped all these different xenomorphs off on this planet because it was an uninhabited world. They wouldn't be able to harm anybody. We thought everything would have been okay. And then that really would have been about it. But with these individuals who have crash landed on the planet, there's now a dangerous threat. We have to go and deal with it because we're Green Lanterns and that's what we do. And so, of course, this leads to Kyle Rayner basically showing up on the scene. Now, in the middle of all this, they basically meet a woman named Crow. Now, of course, this is our first indication that not everything is right here, in the sense that Crow basically says, hey, look, these alien things came out of nowhere. They grabbed my crewmates. They didn't want me and they just whisked off and I have no idea where they went. They went underground in some big cavern, but that's really about it. But what it does is it kind of invokes this little bit of a creepiness factor while also dealing with the idea of Kyle Rayner finding another love interest. Now, again, this is the big deal when it comes to Kyle Rayner. For those of you guys who are new, when it comes to Kyle, he is a guy that can never find romance, right? I mean, that's the way it always is. Every girlfriend he has dies in some form or fashion. Sometimes she'll die a hero. Other times she'll just get stuffed in a refrigerator with her, every bone in her body broken. Whatever the case is, he always loses his girlfriend. He can never be happy. Basically trying to get with this girl Crow. It's kind of funny because he's basically getting all of his advances rebuked. I mean, he's trying to hit on a chick in the worst situation you could possibly conceive of to try to hit on a woman, but it's still kind of funny. Of course, in the middle of exploring the ship, they're suddenly met by the arrival of the Xenomorphs. Now, for Kyle Rayner, it's quick work. I mean, it's creating shields, learning that the Xenomorphs bleed acid, trying to get rid of him, and so on and so forth. A few of the members of these guys who are with him are taken. In fact, everybody but Crow is taken away. But for Kyle himself, he's able to roll through them pretty effectively and able to basically take care of each and every one of these guys. The problem is that in the middle of all this, Kyle loses his ring, and that's where the story actually begins to get really interesting. When it comes to the Green Lanterns, they are some of the weakest beings in existence if they don't have their rings. They're basically just people. They're just regular folks, their own races. When they lose their rings, they're incredibly inept in a lot of different ways. For some people, they're not. For like Kilowog, for example, he's a pretty beastly guy and he can usually handle his own. But for people like Kyle Rayner, he's an artist. I mean, the guy just draws stuff, And so when he loses his lantern ring, there's not a whole lot he can do, not a whole lot he can offer the situation. But in the end, it does create for some pretty interesting storytelling, because it's really him alongside Salak and this girl Crow just kind of having to rely on one another to try to make their way through and try to get things sorted out. And so again, because of the fact that there's not a whole lot, there's really not a lot of meat and potatoes going on with this bit of a story, once they do descend down into the belly of the beast, so to speak, they basically come across this sort of antechamber, in the sense that it is the chamber that leads to where the queen is at. And this whole section is just filled with the corpses of crew members from that ship, eggs, and so on and so forth. Par for the course when you're talking about, xenomorphs and different things like that, the stuff that we love to see, some survivor who's just like, help me, and then the alien breaks out of his chest and all that kind of stuff. No story would be complete if we didn't see a chest burster. I love seeing them. I know you love seeing them. Everybody loves seeing chest bursters. They just love seeing the alien burst out of a person's chest. It's so captivating. It's so interesting. Fun fact, if you actually go back and you watch I want to say it's the director's cut or special edition or extended cut or something like that of the original Ridley Scott Alien movie, there is a segment where he actually intended to basically show what the life cycle of the xenomorph was. That the xenomorph would basically come from an egg, and then the egg would create a face hugger, it would latch onto a person, it would give birth to an alien, the alien would start grabbing people and basically converting them into cocoons, and then that would give birth to more aliens, or at least that was the initial origin. Now, once James Cameron did Aliens 2, and that introduced the queen, the whole idea of the organic matter being converted into a cocoon, that was basically an origin story that was offered in case a queen's not there. Again, it's kind of cool in terms of all that little history and those little tidbits and different things like that, but throughout their attempts to make their way through and find the various crewmates and the individuals who were part of the Corps that Kyle Rayner has already lost, we end up having them basically stow across the path of the alien queen. And so again, things are pretty interesting here because you're talking about a hulking beast, absolutely massive in size. What we also end up finding out is the reason why Kyle Rayner's ring would not respond to his commands to summon it was because of the fact that it was attached to this resin that the aliens leave behind whenever it is that they touch stuff, that really weird, sticky stuff. That sounds weird. It is one of those interesting things, it's one of those one of those crazy sort of situations. But again, much like any of the other movies that we've seen, the queens are highly protective of their hive and they'll kill anything they see on sight. And that's the interesting thing here is, remember, the queens are hardcore. I mean, they're like queen bees. They'll eliminate anything that's considered to be a possible threat, whether it's actually a threat or not. If it's not familiar, it dies. But, of course, with Kyle Rayner and Crow working together, the whole idea is, okay, well, they've already captured Salak, so now we have to save him too. And so what they end up doing is they say, okay, the Green Lantern ring will be the one thing that saves our lives. If we don't pull that off, we're both going to die here. And so what ends up happening is Crow offers herself as a distraction while Kyle Rayner races after the ring. The problem with this is that as the Xenomorphs attack her, we end up finding out she's a robot, which is kind of interesting because that fits in line with the whole Aliens franchise. There's always that one member of the crew who's a robot. Nobody knew that he was a robot the whole time, but it is kind of cool because Kyle Rayner, of course, grabs the ring, and then it's basically Kyle Rayner against an alien queen, and the fight goes exactly as you would expect. Kyle Rayner basically steamrolls this chick, and even like a lot of the Xenomorphs that are trying to attack him, he just creates like a machine gun, basically just sprays everything down. And that's really about it. Like, he just obliterates them all. It really grabs the nature of Hal Jordan and the nature of Kyle Rayner, and it really juxtaposes the two of them together. The logic here is if Hal Jordan and crew dump the Xenomorphs off on, Mogo under the idea that it would be a deserted planet, nobody would be able to be harmed by their presence, and then somebody accidentally crash landed into it because their engines were failing, and it was the closest celestial body to them, then the question becomes, how often will that happen? Are they going to have to throw a Green Lantern garrison on Mogo in order to make sure that anybody who stows across the path of these Xenomorphs, will basically be unharmed and the Xenomorphs to be dealt with? Kyle Rayner says that's not going to happen at all. He calls it a day. And basically what he does is he just supercharges his ring, emits a violent blast of light, and incinerates every last one of the Xenomorphs. And so grabbing, whatever members of the core are left, as well as whatever crew survived the whole ordeal, it really just kind of wraps up. It's one of those things where it's like, hey, look, I mean, we made it out, and, now we're just going to kind of, make our way and hopefully survive and, not have to worry about coming back here to this horrible planet again. And that's really going to be about it. It just kind of stops. I don't know why the stories end the way they do like this. I mean, they don't really wind down. It's just like, all right, the final battle, done. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace. I mean, it's weird how that whole thing happens. But anyway, guys, with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.